Howdy folks and welcome. This video is a continuation of the Express Session Basics video. We're going to learn how to expand our knowledge of Express Session a little bit and utilize a session store, specifically with a Sequelize database. This way, our session information will persist across server restarts, unlike it did before. We'll also learn how to integrate Express Session with Handlebars so that we can render our page conditionally depending on the state of the session information, particularly whether or not a user is logged in. And we'll also be rendering data from our database at the same time so that we'll be able to see how to simultaneously render based off of session information and also based off of database data. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, quick disclaimer. This video is assuming that you have basic knowledge of Express and Express Session, possibly from the previous video, Express Session Basics. It also is assuming that you have basic understanding of MySQL and Sequelize, and as well as having a basic understanding of Handlebars, just how to set it up and how to render Handlebars files. Okay, so the first thing we're going to learn now and expand our knowledge with is how to implement a Sequelize store with Express Session. Previously, our session information was merely stored in server memory, meaning that if we stop the server, our session information would be gone. So, a quick overview of this project. It is now following the MVC folder structure. So now we have our routes in a controllers folder, and we're rendering handlebars files from within our views folder rather than HTML files. Okay, so now we want to be able to store our session information in a Sequelize database. How do we do that? First and foremost, we have to install this dependency, connect session Sequelize. This is what we use to set up Express Session to be able to store the session information in a Sequelize database. The only other new dependency here besides that is Express Handlebars. So the setup for this is done in our server. So let's take a look at that. And where we start configuring the ability to store session information in the database is right here. This is basically boilerplate setup. It's kind of syntactically strange, but we're basically creating a constructor function here, Sequelize store, by importing connect session Sequelize and calling this session.store method on it. And then here's where we were configuring our Express Session options before with our secret and resave and cookie options, etc. We previously didn't have this store option. So we set the value of the store property here to a new instance of Sequelize store. And within the parameters for that, we specify the database type, which of course is Sequelize. That's it. Provided your database and everything is set up correctly, that's all you have to do to have Express Session store the session information in your Sequelize database. And after that, you really don't have to worry about it. That's just where the session information will be stored, which is great. So let's have a look at what our app here is doing so far. I'll go ahead and start the server, npm start, and it's up and running. And as you can see, I'm reloading the page and I'm still logged in. I've already implemented login and logout functionality. And even if I were to stop and start the server yet again and reload again, I remain logged in. And when I log out, I can't access that homepage. It just redirects me right back to the login page. The way I'm handling that redirecting and protecting which routes can be accessed if I'm not logged in or logged in is with a middleware function. I'm calling this middleware function with auth, and it's very simple. It looks just like a route with request and response, but we also utilize this next parameter, which is a function that means move on to the next piece of middleware or to the endpoint. And so it simply checks the session object, which is now being stored in Sequelize, whether or not there is this logged in property and if it's truthy. If it is not, we're going to redirect the user to /login. Otherwise, we call next. So let's see that in action. We'll look at our home routes here. So if I'm trying to access the home page, which is at the path, / with auth, which gets called right here, will determine whether or not this endpoint gets executed. If I am authenticated, we will execute this and we will render my homepage .handlebars. Otherwise, we won't even get to this portion of the code. We'll simply be redirected to login. So in a way, I'm conditionally rendering based off of session information. I'm using the session logged in property to determine whether or not certain handlebars files will even render, or whether or not I get redirected. But what if I want to actually have the behavior on the page be affected by the session information? For example, as you can see here, it says logged in as, and it doesn't say who I'm logged in as. And also, I can see both the login and log out button there. I don't want to see them both at the same time. I only want to see log out if I'm logged in, and vice versa. So real quick, let's just take a look at our user routes within our API routes, because I want to show you that when we sign up and create a new user, we modify the session object with rec.session.save, and we set a logged in property to be true. And that's what we use to check logged in status. But I'm also adding a rec.session.email. I can add as many properties to the session object as I want. And I'm passing along the email that was provided in this fetch request to create a new user. Same thing when I log in, which I was looking at login, but it's the same thing. I'm passing the email and adding an email property to the session object so that I have access to that as well as the logged in status. Okay, back to the home routes, because this is where the magic happens, where we can actually pass data to handlebars. And the way we do that is we create a single JavaScript object as the second argument of res.render. It has to be a single JavaScript object. It can't be an array and it can't be anything else. So what we do is we start adding properties to this object. A logical one to add would be logged in. And spell it right. And the value for that, of course, is going to be the current value of rec.session.loggedin. And while we're at it, we might as well give it an email property. That's what I'm going to be showing up here in the nav bar, logged in as. The users here only have emails and passwords. It's not very complex user model. And similarly to when we specified the rec.session.loggedin as the value for logged in, we specify rec.session.email as the value for email. So since this object is being passed as the second argument to res.render, this object will be accessible inside of the home page as well as the layout that the home page is being rendered in, which in this case is main.handlebars. So if we go to main.handlebars, we can access the logged in property and the email property here and do things conditionally. For example, well, this isn't exactly conditionally. Well, yes, it is. I don't even want this whole thing to show up unless I'm logged in. So we use a hamburger helper. Just kidding. It's called a handlebars helper. It's a built-in helper method, and it's simply called if. It's similar to a JavaScript if statement. If logged in. Because that object that we passed as the second argument of res.render is now accessible here, and we can reference the individual properties of it, such as logged in. So if logged in, the stuff that's below the if gets rendered. And so I will just close the if with a /if right here. So this will only show up if I'm logged in. It'll be gone from the nav bar when I'm logged out. And then I can access the email property of that object that we passed simply by typing email here. This is how we render certain data properties in Handlebars. Whoa. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for these login and log out buttons. If I'm logged in, I want to render this one. So let's see, that starts here. You can do this with an if else, and you can also sort of do a tricky thing called unless, which is basically saying if not this. That made no sense. Let me show you what I mean. Let's do another if statement first. If logged in, I want to render what's below it and before this closing of the if. So if I'm logged in, I want to see this logged out button. Here's where we utilize an unless. Oops. Unless I'm logged in, render this login button. And then we close the unless statement. Okay, I'm going to stop and start the server just in case, and I'm going to reload this page. Whoa, all I see are 2 buttons now. Okay, I'm going to log in. I see my email here, and I did it wrong. It looks like I did it backwards. I only want to see the log out button if I'm logged in. Okay, I didn't spell it right. Okay, let's reload the page. And then I did the unless thing wrong, I guess. Yeah, I spelled it wrong again. Weird. Okay, reload. There we go. We fixed it. So that's how you use session information, such as logged in status, to conditionally render things on the page. It's a really handy tool. And there you have it. We utilized session data to conditionally render some things in our nav bar. So I hope this gives you a good understanding of what Handlebars can do with data. It's particularly handy when you're combining it with Express Session to have Handlebars render things conditionally based off of the status of that session object. So that's it, folks. Happy coding. Take care.